Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Wisdom Chat Plus. I'm Phil Holdsworth of Aurum Gold, your co-host, and my co-host is Rachel Surtees. Hi Rachel.
Hi Phil, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good to be here, especially after I missed the last one, so glad to be back.
Yeah, it was definitely a good one, was the last one. No, we missed you. We definitely missed you. And we've got some great guests with us today. We're talking all things financial technology, and we've got with us Lee Usher, Toby Johnson, and Mark McElveny. Hi, guys. Welcome to Wisdom Chat.
Hi, Phil.
Yeah, we're all that's it with technology, isn't it? We can't all talk at once, can we? But let's do a round robin. Lee, starting with yourself, let's just go around the room and just introduce yourself and who you work for and, you know, what you do.
Yeah, okay. My name's Lee Usher, obviously, and I'm Credit Services Director for Trustfolio. Trustfolio's a family of organisations that supports creditors, debt advisors, insolvency practitioners and more with digital solutions. And those solutions are focused on delivering efficiency, improved outcomes and value. So fundamentally, which we'll talk about in more detail, I'm sure, over the course of the podcast, our solutions, like lots of other fintechs, take data from one source, put it into a more simple use format for any particular audience, and we give them access to that at the push of a button. That's fundamentally what we do, removing costs, delays associated with your old style post type communications and all of the other benefits that come with what digital data brings.
Oh, thank you, Lee. That's brilliant. Yourself, Toby.
Hi, so I'm Toby Johnson. I'm director at Triangle. The main thing we do is provide a platform called Step. Step is designed to make conversations around financial well-being and your wider problems that somebody might face in life much easier. So we deliver that as a digital tool, which can be integrated into, particularly what's relevant here, financial services products. So that might be collections or customer apps. And our key aim is to make it really easy for somebody to identify, okay, here are the problems I face in my life. It might be directly financial. It might be mental well-being. Can we take that person through a set of questions to identify, okay, this is it, and here's some really good options for you. And these are local, specialized, and have basically a high chance of being able to make an impact in that person's life. So that's what we're trying to do, and we're trying to now distribute that to get that into the right spaces, the right digital channels across the whole sector, really.
That's brilliant, Toby. And certainly, you know, when we talk about financial well-being or any form of well-being, there's a massive need out there. And probably more so following the pandemic and the effects that's had on us. So thank you very much, Toby. Yourself, Mark.
Hi, Phil. Mark McElveny, I'm Client Services Director for iHub. iHub is an organisation which looks at customer affordability. So we are aiming to change the way that consumers, creditors and any organisation in general looks at a customer's income and expenditure. So our objective is to change that, where the customer will own and manage one central income and expenditure form, and they can share it with any organisation that is asking for it. So in essence, taking what could be 7, 8, 9, 45-minute income and expenditure conversations with lots of different creditors into a one customer-owned portal.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Mark. So quite diverse a group that we are today. And as I say, guys, thank you very much for joining us. Just in terms of the financial technology market, we know that started to really grow in the 2010s. And when we reached 2018 and the open banking regulations came into being, things just seemed to mushroom from there. How do you feel the fintech market is going at the moment? What are some of the real benefits, the pluses that are out there at this moment in time? Lee, do you want to sort of start the ball rolling?
Yeah, so I'll declare my sort of views from the start are very biased, and I love anything technology-wise. I've had from about the age of 5 when gaming consoles came to be, and I've had the first gaming console, I had the first iPad, everything. So I love technology. And I'm probably a little bit biased in my views. So I see the positives a lot of the time. And when we look at sort of financial services in particular, I see all the improvements there, improved access to financial products, better oversight, transparency, from a customer point of view, much better sort of view of different products that's available to them at the push of a button. Things like digital wallets, mobile banking, given access to, at the push of a button really, or the end of your phone now, your smartphone, to information that customers just didn't have before. And with that, I just see huge opportunities. I get the risks, and there is risks in terms of data security, but I see risks in the old style way of doing things as well, more risks. So yes, lots of opportunities and benefits in terms of the fintech revolution as I see it. Yeah.
What do you think, Toby, from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I probably have a similar kind of personal stance that, you know, I use mobile banking myself. I found that kind of traditional banking, at least where they were when I left, was just kind of disappointing in the ton of technology they were providing. It was just so basic in terms of like, yes, you can make a payment to your friend, you can see a statement, and now moving to a world in which the possibilities of what you can connect into that, the opportunities that opens up in terms of what it might mean to manage your money when you can have much more sophisticated tools available just to see your own personal finances and track a budget and create that within those tools. I think that's fantastic. I don't think we're there anywhere near there yet in what the possibilities of that will be as the market matures. But and I think there's also a fantastic level of competition that's been really healthy. So even just sending international payment, now being able to have choice over how you do that, I think is really good, both in being able to do so with transparent fees, but also it forces your kind of traditional banks to actually respond and compete rather than everybody agreeing we're all going to charge you 4% because we can. So yeah. I think again, like loads of I generally fall on the more excited, but being aware that there are things we do have to worry about. There's definitely risks of people being left behind, and people are being left behind.
I think it's very evident that there's been a real push on the banks to really catch up with the whole financial technology market. And I've seen that with my own bank and how it's developed its online access to all the banking facilities. So, yeah, I see what you're saying, but likewise agree with concerns that people have, particularly about things like security and so on. What about yourself, Mark? What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely in agreement with the guys there. I'm sat on a desk with screens on screens and home automation, so I'm definitely in the same sort of wheelhouse. But I think for me, the one big takeaway, probably more recently and being relatively new to sort of fintech as a company, what the pandemic did, I think that's kind of really forced people's hands to think differently about digital engagement and what we can do for customers, and kind of that, yes, it was an awful time, but that 2-year period has massively accelerated adoption of fintechs and encouraged particularly some of the bigger organizations who are traditionally much slower moving to start working with smaller, more nimble organizations, or even just thinking about how they approach, but equally conscious of how fast everything's moving, the risk of those people that are being left behind as well. It's almost the gap's far bigger than it's ever been. Yeah,
I think, Rachel and I were talking about it, weren't we, about the impact of the pandemic on ourselves, our health and well-being, but also I agree with you, Mark, about the fact that it's driven the uptake of fintech far more, but it's also highlighted another difficult area, and you've touched on it, that the people being left behind. And there are people out there, aren't there, being left behind, who can't necessarily engage with fintech in the way that we perhaps would, for all manner of reasons. And
this is one of the areas of my interest, really, because I'm a psychotherapist. I come at things from the perspective of looking at it in terms of human relationships, how we relate to each other, and access to the digital world and interacting more and more in a digital way is de-skilling us relationally as a society. So part of my worries are that people are getting left behind, and what are we doing about it? What's the fintech industry doing about that as well? So opening it up to you guys. Toby, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think is there's definitely this kind of difficulty of people left behind, but I also see, particularly because we deal a lot with vulnerability and more the higher down the vulnerability end. So probably some of the technology we do really hits much stronger towards minority communities and people with complex needs. And I think there's just this huge potential, because at the end of the day, there is no way that you're going to get, large number of organizations providing like translators to be able to talk to somebody in their own language if somebody has really low understanding. I think there's this really fascinating, exciting opportunity to bring more people in. People have been traditionally left behind by the olden days pre-tech. And I think that is something that, although tech is definitely, like when you look at traditionally older people, it is excluding a lot of people. At the same time, it's including a whole set of people who have always been excluded. So I think that's something that quite excites me. And a lot of the technology we're trying to design and roll out is, that particularly looking at conversational technology of, can we, in somebody's own language, have a conversation about their finances or their challenges, and have that to be a natural conversation that they would never have had before. So that's where I guess we're quite excited. But there's still definitely challenges on the other people that are left behind.
I'm thinking about the kind of there's all sorts of things that may get in the way of you accessing technology, isn't there? So things like being able to afford broadband at home, things like not owning a smartphone, things like not having credit for your phone, and those sorts of things, they all stand in the way. So there's all sorts of age-related stuff, so people who aren't tech savvy, there's all sorts of things that stand in the way of it, including language. And I'm thinking about kind of social responsibility, really, of the fintech industry. And I know you guys tend to do things to try and bridge those gaps as well. So I'm curious about some of those drives.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we've been conscious of, and kind of part of my role looking at product and have a background in banking and debt advice. So there's always we're a fintech, we have a certain place, and there are certain objectives we can't overcome because they're bigger than us, they're societal, but it doesn't mean we ignore them completely. So yes, you need some form of digital access to use IE Hub, but the way we've designed the product is that somebody who is tech savvy can definitely get in and use it, but we've structured the product in a way that you could work with a debt advice provider, or your bank could get you access to IE Hub and they could do it for you. And there's a space in the middle where there can be some hand holding, and we have kind of from a social perspective a free offering to debt advice providers, encouraging those into the network to do the things that we can't as a fintech.
So I think like what Mark's just said around having multiple options, of having like maybe technology is inevitably going to be your core offering, but also making sure that you've got other channels which might be a kind of human facilitated avenue. And that's certainly what we've designed our service also with the idea that this can either be digital self-service, which is great for maybe 70% of the people. But I do think it's essential that those services are always designed with whatever that might be. If you still need to go down into your branch and talk with a person, that's still available for those that need that.
So it sounds like there's a lot of collaboration with more statutory institutions like banks and, like you said, digital advice services, things like that. Sounds like there's an awful lot of collaboration goes on there, and you've got to be quite linked up as an industry.
Lee, you do quite a bit with data, or Trustfolio does with the data. So you're bringing lots of different types of industries together, aren't you?
We do, and I just want to go back and make a couple of points in reference to what's been discussed. Because Rachel, I totally get that we need to be inclusive and mindful of being able to communicate with everyone and giving everyone access. The age thing, though, I've got a slightly different view, and that's from first-hand experience. My parents are late 70s, and my mother is still on an iPad a smartphone, doing online banking transactions. Before there just isn't, he's not interested. So it's maybe not just an age thing, but a desire or a willingness to adapt to change. And we've got to be helpful and understand in that regard. And also, Mark and I used to work together. So I use this case study quite often. We used to work together for a large UK servicer who used to service around about 35 banks, building societies, private equity firms. And we tried always to get people to engage with debt advice through traditional telephone referrals and speaking to people and trying to hotkey them what was called a warm transfer them to a debt advice provider. And we always struggled to do that. And then we developed a digital referral tool. We developed our website, so it was a lot more sort of user friendly and allowed people to access advice, specialist advice digitally. And within a month of that going live, we saw the referrals increase by about 80%. And most of those were from customers who also reported some sort of vulnerability or mental health issues. So they felt more comfortable engaging digitally than actually speaking to someone over the telephone. So again, it's a big tick in the box for me in terms of how you can support those more vulnerable customers who might feel that speaking to another human being is just too much for them. But yeah, in terms of Trustfolio, I mean, one of the things we build on fundamentally is data and sharing data from one source with another. And if we look at what we've developed most recently, what our newest tool is the Creditor platform. So we've removed thousands and thousands of bits of post from hundreds of different insolvency practitioners potentially who are feeding information into local authorities and channeled everything into one central portal where creditors can look at things in a consistent way. It's not coming in different formats. They've got that at the push of a button. Lots of local authorities, their teams are working remotely now, so they don't have to be on site and working bits of post and responding to bits of post and the delays that comes with that. But also things like automation of tasks and not removing the human, but making the human more efficient, because a lot of the manual processes that were involved, we can remove that and the cost associated. So yeah, big benefits there. I am aware as well, though, that the rise of the fintech is also, there's a risk of information overload, and there's so many different sources of new tools and solutions. It's difficult for organizations to keep track of, and that's something else we need to be mindful of, I suppose.
You're right about the amount of not just information, but products out there that people can access is just incredible. And I get asked oftentimes in the courses that I run, what tools would you recommend for different functions that are talking about, like managing their monthly spending plan or something like this. And so me as an individual, it's quite a tall order to keep abreast of, what's developing in the market, because it's moving so fast. But one thing that really strikes me about its development is seeing more and more where there's a degree of integration for different things. So if we're talking about finances, one of the things that can be sometimes a challenge is I use one product for this, another product for, might be do my online banking here, or over here, I've got like an app that does my spending plan. Over here, I've got for me at the moment, I've got my recipe book online. So it's like having some tutor next to you teaching you how to make different recipes. But it's like, what I mean about the fact that we're looking in lots of different areas. But I've seen more of some of these areas now coming together and collaborating. So that I can see is a real benefit for people who engage with fintech and want to get the most out of it. Is that something that, as you're developing your products, that you start to see other organizations or other products out there, that there might be some form of collaboration, or how do you see that going?
Definitely. I mean, that's part of the network feature of IE Hub, as well as having sort of customers and credit as part of the network. We bring in other tech organizations to help sort of with that connection, that integration. So working with people like Vulnerability Registration Service, Invest. These are tools which are different to what we have, but equally as useful to our users. And that's part of our kind of ongoing strategy, is looking at where that integration can be done and make it so there's a one-stop shop in as much sort of a real space as we possibly can get it.
How about yourself, Toby, in terms of what you're developing and have developed?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, one thing is interesting is like the kind of the portability of your data. It's something which I don't think we're super far on now, but we're almost like what you'll find so often is you're always pumping out data into these different ways. If you end up in financial difficulty, very much down the Mark side of things, but you might have given a really rich picture of your financial information. And that might be useful to have in so many different points. There might be several other organizations you need to interact with, where that is really valuable. And if we can get away from repeating that and get much better kind of mechanisms to obviously give consent to pass that between organizations, that's incredibly valuable. But from our perspective, we're really interested in, maybe we're not quite so deeply financial that we don't actually care what you're paying for your utilities, but we're really interested in what somebody's overall situation demographic is, because that information is so valuable to what might help them, where we might be able to prompt them to maybe contact this organization, or have you ever considered this type of service before, as that could be really valuable for people in your, however we slice that. And I think, that there's, it's something that we certainly building on. We're very much trying to build a network. We're already kind of pulling in hundreds of people, organizations on the charity sector side, because that's where a lot of the solutions that we're providing are coming from. But we're also working with local councils now and trying to build these very local networks with local specialists who can be, for example, within Birmingham, we're now working with a handful of refugee and asylum specialist organizations. And they have this really rich picture of kind of data of what's available there. And it's just this question of like, well, how can we get that knowledge and that information, which is really valuable, and get that into a utilities provider that happens to be helping someone within that segment? And I think that kind of data sharing is just, it's really exciting, because I think the value to people and the impact that can have on people's lives is just full of potential. I think it's, the sector at the moment, I think we're all working as fast as we can to build these connections and build infrastructure and ways of sharing data, which is going to facilitate that.
They say that data's the next gold, isn't it? In terms of how valuable it is. But we've all seen when people haven't had up-to-date information and up-to-date data, that when things have gone wrong, and it's caused difficulties for individuals when those things arise. So you can see the real importance of that data being, good, accurate, and extensive enough that people can make well-informed decisions. I suppose, Lee, in terms of the data that you're working with, I mean, that's key, isn't it? Making well-informed decisions to enable the people who are affected or are included in that data. I mean, how do we ensure that we're making sure that the data is right and it's good, and it's going to be as valuable as we know it can be?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me about blockchain again there.
I was weaving my way around it.
Yeah. So as you know, our data is built on the blockchain system of recording information. So from a security side, it's future-proof there. But you're right. I mean, the data or the outcomes are only as good as the quality of the data that's input to it. And I suppose in terms of how you ensure that quality, it depends on who owns the data, who's processing the data, and fundamentally who is using it at the end of the process as well. So you have to have the right controls in place to make sure that the data is accurate. Once you've got that accurate data, though, if you compare it to a bit of post or 1,000 bits of post, the things you can do with that data in terms of creating better oversight, better transparency of a customer journey, measuring performance, which I think is fundamental in terms of the sectors we work in, the creditor sector and the advice sector, all ultimately for the greater good of the consumer and the client at the end of the process. But yes, I mean, from our point of view, we've got controls, and that's a big part of the sort of the team's effort in terms of making sure that data is accurate, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, I think you to explain blockchain. but yeah, sorry, Toby, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to add. I think just the key is really it's data sharing between organizations. That's, in my view, the only way we're really going to get to a point where one organization can have really useful, accurate information, whether that's about wider trends that are non-personal data or whether it's personal data. I think that's the only real way that we're going to, where data is being generated from your interaction with one institution or organization, if that can go over to the other. Obviously, again, the really tricky thing is how do we manage this world of data when consent is obviously so key, and making sure that it's never used to harm a person, because it can easily be done so. But in our view, yeah, it's the more we can pull organizations into these kind of network-based technologies, which are really designed for that purpose of like, let's use what you've got here, let's help the customer or the person with it in this way. I think that's the only real future which is going to solve this challenge of how do we keep data useful.
Yeah, I know with yourself, Mark, with IE Hub, that's quite key in terms of, that was really the purpose of why you did IE Hub, wasn't it? The fact that people didn't have to fill in an income and expenditure form umpteen times when they needed help.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a real risk around data security as the world is now with I&Es, and that there could be 10, 15 I&Es that are all slightly different versions of one customer. And that's, again, if we can turn that round to have the customer own version, that's where we have a lot of control. The data quality piece is always an interesting one, kind of in terms of affordability. And I always think of it is always right at that moment in time, but somebody's affordability, particularly when they're impacted by a life event, is constantly changing. But being able to make one single change and update it 10 times is much more effective, much more efficient than having to have 10 individual conversations. Remember on the last, what you said on the first. So the data quality piece has this sort of a different context for us. And then obviously the security of that is as important as Lee and Toby said. You've got to be able to hold it, because we ultimately are the custodian of the data. It's the customer's data, but we've got to hold that safe, and they've got to have trust in us as an organization. And as a fintech, it's about building that trust and kind of building that reputation with not just our users, but clients and other network members as well.
I agree. I think as well, Mark's made a really good point there. You've got to look at what the data, what's the purpose of the data, what's the outcome you want to achieve, and the important part that Mark's mentioned is this something that can change from not just 1 month to the next, but potentially 1 week or 1 day to the next. So things like open banking, we provide 1,100 debt advisors across the UK with credit reports and open banking data to help inform the affordability of a customer. If you just use that open banking data in isolation and make a decision on that, it's not going to be a good outcome for the customer. The debt advisor's got to add their skill and understanding and knowledge of a customer's circumstances to coax the additional bits of information, and the validation of that open banking data can be really, really useful, but it's not the full answer, and it's not to replace a debt advisor as an example in that instance.
I remember I won't name them, but one of the high street banks on that point, Lee, about how a total reliance on the technology, actually the outcome for the individuals in question wasn't good. This particular bank had introduced a system some years back where it assisted them in making decisions as to whether they accepted a plan, for example, from one of their customers who found themselves in financial difficulty, whether they accepted the plan or they didn't accept the plan. And based on just data in and answers coming out, very often an answer would be no, when in actual fact, the expertise, as you rightly say, from, say, a debt advisor would have said, actually, no, they do meet the requirements and it should be accepted. And I remember stood there watching them as they were so enthusiastic about showing me this new system when I said, oh, could we use an example case study? I've got one here. And I put it to them, and the answer came out, don't accept. And they were all really excited until I told them the backstory. And then all of a sudden they realized, we have a problem. Yeah. So it wasn't so much back to the drawing board, but it was certainly for them who weren't at the coalface, a realization that there's more work to be done so that it doesn't bring these inadvertently give outcomes that actually don't serve the right purpose.
Yeah.
And it was a challenge, I know. And for you guys in the industry, when you're talking about who is this data for, what are the outcomes that you're looking for from the use of this data, that you get the best outcomes at the end of the day. So whether that's giving people the direction they need to the right kind of resources that would help them in their circumstances, whether that's enabling them to communicate their circumstances in a way where a collections company could make the right kind of decision that would be helpful rather than hindering a person working through their indebtedness, or whether it's data that is clean enough and clear enough that collections companies are actually able to use it in the best way possible. It's I suppose it's always a challenge.
It is, yeah, it is. And I mean, just going back to the general point, though, I think if you understand what you want to achieve from that data, you build a process and you build a customer journey, which is a bit of a cliche, I know, but you build the customer journey around that and all the checks and balances that are needed to ensure that's being used in the right way. Like I say, it's a real good example. We've had some fantastic feedback from advisors to say the data, it's enabled them to do X, Y, Z more advice sessions. It's made them be more efficient, but in no way could it replace what a debt advisor does in certain circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So it supports the process, but it doesn't replace the human element.
Yeah.
It's got to do that, though, hasn't it, at the end of the day? Because if we lose that sort of human element, can we build systems that are not one size fits all? This is where AI comes in, isn't it? Yeah. Can we get AI to a point where it can actually make quite intelligent decisions, where then it begs the question, do you need the advisor? Well, I know we don't want to go down that route, but yeah.
We've not talked about Chat GPT yet, which I'm aware of, and I don't know if you've had a go using it. I have, but Rachel mentioned the risk of unskilled workforce, I suppose. I think that's what you termed it earlier on. Chat GPT, AI, you potentially are heading to a place which you've just suggested there, Phil. Not quite sure we'll ever replace humans. I hope not, because I'm one myself. But I think the opportunities for that are limitless. Have you used that, by the way, anyone on the call?
I've used one called Jasper, which enables you to, as part of research, be able to compile articles around particular subjects. So all you do is you put a load of questions in that you're wanting answers for. And then all of a sudden, like seconds later, it comes back with several examples of articles it's produced. So the thing then is to actually say, well, was this produced by AI or was it produced by a human being? Can you tell the difference?
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole different podcast. Toby, I saw you nodding there. So you've used it, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, my response, I think, as most people's has been, is this is astounding, exciting, terrifying, all in once. It is. I mean, I think in terms of what it's capable of doing now, none of it is a surprise. I think if you work in AI, and we are an AI company, we were all expecting AI to be able to do this stuff. But speaking for myself, I thought that was 5 years away. And to see it here today, I'm like, oh my goodness, and it's the pace of the change. And I think that's the really concerning thing. It's not that, like, I think we can't kind of project manage this transition as a society in a really positive way. But if it moves as fast as it is, I'm like, this is going to disrupt so many areas of our lives, almost every industry, in ways which are really hard to even predict right now. And I think it's going to be doing this in, over the next 5 years. We're going to be in a very different world. And it is fascinating because, I mean, a lot of what it's doing, it's stuff that, we ourselves as a company, we're trying to figure out these really complex problems of, bringing back to what you said a bit earlier, Phil, around how do we deal with choice? Like, as the world kind of explodes with options, tools that are available to people, how do we manage that? And, our use of AI is particularly in trying to use data to describe and map out all these different possibilities for people, and then take this really difficult decision choice of, based on everything we know about you here, this has the most chance of being a helpful thing to you. And I think that those kind of problems, I think, are really fantastic uses of AI. And I think there's going to be loads of those. But I'm still very concerned about all the kind of fallout we're going to get, and the people being left behind is going to be a whole new, different class of people left behind. It's not just I'm left behind because I haven't got the right technology. It's I'm not valuable in the employment market anymore because my skills are obsolete. So that's my feeling.
Yeah, I think Lee's right about it being another podcast. Sorry, Mark, you were saying.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, the probably not quite at the AI level, but I think tech is seen as a risk, probably more so in some of the more traditional industries within more debt advice. I know if we approach certain organizations, offer them use of our tech, that there is a real and genuine worry of, well, we're trying to replace that person, we're trying to take their job, we're trying to put them out of a job. And that's definitely not the case. And completely agree with Lee, recognizing the level of skill, knowledge that's needed to do the job. We want to enable you to do more and be better and focus in the areas that your skill set is designed for, not spending, in our case, an hour just putting numbers into boxes on a screen. That debt advisor's time is much more valuable elsewhere. But there is, I definitely see there's a nervousness and a worry around sort of heading in that direction. We're probably a good way away from Terminator, but there's people have got that sitting in the back of their mind somewhere.
As the disruptor that I am, some people may argue that that time that they spend sitting, inputting the numbers, etc., allows them to actually sit with the data for longer and to process it in a different way. Just to play devil's advocate, are you, in trying to make people more efficient by doing that job for them, taking that away from them, allowing them to process things faster, are you robbing them of something as well?
I think that's a fair challenge. I mean, certainly if we look at just a face-to-face debt advice perspective, you could certainly say within that time spent gathering data, there's an opportunity to build rapport, kind of pick up on some of that body language. So in a certain extent, then yes, you would lose that. But I suppose where we would come from it is the debt advice industry is so stretched. There's a lot of challenge there. And yes, we maybe erode 10% of that human interaction, but is that a fair trade-off for 50% more people being helped? I'm pulling the numbers out the air, but that's kind of where I would look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel, do you know my more philosophical and hopeful view of this in terms of technology? So instead of getting that person to input the data, get the tech to do it, but get that person to go for a walk and go down to a 4-day working week, like we've been sort of talking about in the news recently. We've got the technology to make people's lives easier, basically. Don't need to pay them less. Make people's lives easier, make them work less hours, let the tech do it, and let people live a happy and longer life. That would be my view of tech.
I think it's, you're right, but it's interesting. It's the mindsets of people whether they would be motivated enough to say, do you know what, I've got this time, I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to be sedentary, or whatever it is. And obviously it's got to be down to people's choice, but it's whether people actually take it up, because we know I spend, and I think Mark, you alluded to this earlier on with your plethora of screens, I think you were talking about. But if you sat at your desk all day long, working with the technology, after a while, it does have that sort of profound impact, both on your physical and your, I suppose, your psychological well-being. And we saw some of this in lockdown, didn't we, in terms of people feeling disconnected. So technology would connect people. So everybody's on Zoom, even though they'd never heard of Zoom before the pandemic. So everybody's on Zoom, and you get the famous strapline, "You're on mute," coming out. But people exactly. But you see, but people did. They wanted to engage with each other, so they used technology in that way. But as we move along and as we progress down the AI route, I just wonder whether we'll be more creative on how we can maintain our health and well-being and utilize the technology in the best way possible. And I think that's going to be quite an interesting one to observe as we move along. I mean, what are your thoughts with regards to what you're seeing out there when people are starting to engage more and more with the technology? I mean, Mark, you talked about more people, doing referrals. Was that because they felt more confident that they didn't have somebody over their shoulder pointing a finger saying, "It's all your fault"?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the feedback we get points towards financial anxiety, lack of confidence, lack of control. So being able to do something in a digital space where there aren't any other eyes watching definitely kind of helps individuals overcome that. I think kind of the more of that space that we can look into, the better we focus. And obviously consumer duties leading a lot of financial services in that way, looking at undue harm and helping identify those particular issues. So we've got to be smarter, sharper at picking those kind of the non-written. So everything's on a screen, everything's numbers in a box. How do we look at those? And that's where we look at other tools, other services that kind of come into the iHub side. But kind of to one of your other points, I think there is a risk of kind of complacency when everything's at your fingertips and looking at that human interaction as well. And we kind of had a conversation just on another forum around how do you get people back up out of the desk and meeting face to face in a work environment. Zoom has become just the go-to, and you kind of do become I've got to get on a train and I've got to travel and do that to get the same interaction perceived as an hour Zoom call.
Meeting a pub.
Yeah, that's unless you've got your own bar. I was looking at a property the other day and they already had an inbuilt bar, and it was, could that sway my decision as to whether I bought this property or not? No, but it is a real sort of I suppose concern in many respects, because then you see a whole issue of other health problems if people are not mindful of the fact that you have to intentionally take time away from technology in your desk or whatever it is that you're doing, but equally at the same time not reject technology, because it's going that way anyway. The government always said, and they used that term, didn't they, digital by default. We still hear it today. So there's a driver to go down that route. It's the motive that drives it. And oftentimes I think the motive is about money. Not, I might be controversial here, but I think it is about money, about saving costs. So therefore it does worry me about people's jobs in the future. Because
it's always about the money. It's always about the money. But I'd be interested in Rachel's views on that. So if you look at customers and your workforce, it's similar challenges, isn't it? That some customers just don't want to speak to someone. It's a added stress. And to be able to engage digitally is just much easier. And same for the workforce. Some people just don't like going into the office. And if they can sit at home and work behind the desk and be more productive and feel better about the day, why not let them do that? I get that. We've all got our own views and some strong views from people, politicians saying, get people back in the office. They should be back in the office. I don't buy into that. I think if people can be productive in their own environment, let them.
Totally agreed in one breath, and then contradictory in the next breath, because if we didn't have these technologies available to us, actually people would interact with each other, would be relational in different ways. They would still need to find ways to be relational, so they would still need to pick up the phone to communicate something in order to get the outcomes that they desired. They would still need to get themselves into work in order to earn a living. They would still need to X, Y, and Z. So in some respects, the advent of these technologies has created that drive to stay away, to not engage, to not be in direct communication. And then in others, it has supported more connection. So it kind of gives and takes away at the same time, as far as I'm concerned. I hasten to add, I'm quite techie, and I'm a bit of a tech adopter, really. So similarly to you, I've got everything that I need in and around me, and I use it quite prolifically. So I'm not anti-tech by any stretch of the imagination, but I do witness the impact that it has on how people relate to each other. And whilst we can say that, you know, tech has connected us much more than we've ever been in the past, it's, in a lot of respects, it can be like a false sense of connection. It's not real connection. We feel like we're connected, but we're not actually really necessarily interacting with each other in a way that is supportive of human health.
I'm going to stop calling myself a tech geek and use your what you've just used there, tech adopter. Sounds like a dinosaur. I like it.
One thing I've always found kind of interesting, particularly with a lot of, if you look at financial technology, is, you know, the replacement of the bank, the high street bank. And I don't know what I think about this, but there's this kind of argument which is like, no, I don't want you to shut my local branch because that human connection is so important in my week. And part of me says, like, yes, but equally I'm like, is that the kind of social interaction we really want to be valuing as a society? Your interaction with somebody in the post office over a counter, like, is trying to preserve that type of social interaction really valuable to us? Or should we say, okay, let's automate all that if we can do so, and then put that money into making real community interactions with people? No, I think that is my view. I decided during saying that.
I think that's a really valid.
The thing that's missing for me is they're putting that money into.
Yeah.
It feels like it's missing for me at the moment.
Yeah, I think, what was it? The road tax. The idea of the road tax was tax vehicles, and the money gathered would be used to maintain the roads. You know, I sometimes wonder as to where that money's actually gone. But so, yeah, it could be the same. But it's a good point that you make, though, Toby, about the fact that if they were altruistic in many respects and concerned about people's well-being, welfare, would there be a level of investment in looking at creative ways in which they could get society to connect for the right reasons, rather than... because I know that's been one of the arguments about banks closing and communities, rural communities, not having access to any form. There's not even a post office. All of them have gone. And so you've got to travel several miles if you want to engage with them. So the driver then is gone to technology. But you've still got people in those communities who can't engage with that. Other people, that's their only form of engagement. And their argument is, but I missed the interaction with the staff in the banking hall or whatever. And then you're thinking, well, it does seem a little bit sad if that was your sole human interaction and there isn't any other forms. But there are some who are just quite happy with that. They don't want real in-depth interaction, like, go over to that corner and talk to that person over there. There's a focus, isn't there? When you walk into the post office, you're going for a specific function. There's a focus. So in that process, you might just have a general sort of chit chat with the person. And some people are quite happy with that. And others, like me, like to talk the hind legs off the donkey. There's too much smiling going on for our listeners. That comment.
It takes me to know one, Phil. That's all I say.
Yeah, thank you. Just thinking about the future then. I know we touched on AI, and AI is a big, big subject, but it's rapidly going there, as Toby pointed out. The speed in which things are changing are, on one hand, quite frightening, and on the other, can be quite exciting. Will we ever get to a Skynet, situation where the computers take over the world? That's perhaps one of the fears that people have. But what do you see the future looking like? I won't say 50 years' time, because technology moves that fast. What about 10 or 20 years' time? What do you guys see?
Well, if I suppose if we could predict that, would be very, very rich people. Where I feel it's going is it's inevitable that technology will become more and more prevalent in the workforce and our daily lives. My experience and my viewers, that will make things easier and simpler. We'll have to caution against those unscrupulous people who will try and take advantage of that and advantage of people. And I'm really mindful of the sort of the conscience that Rachel is providing in terms of this discussion around the sort of the human side of this, and not losing that human touch, if you like, in the interaction. But in terms of looking at it from a work point of view and a business point of view, I think we'll be fast forward 5-10 years in a much more effective and efficient place now, with better oversight and better transparency, as long as the right controls are in place and wrapped around that.
What about yourself, Mark?
I would agree. I mean, I think when we look at some innovation from the past and how long it takes certain things to really catch the general population, we think about things like chip and pin. That was around for far longer than people would realise, and we're probably on a similar type of journey with things like open banking. So I think we'll see continued evolution, but probably the big thing will be about adoption. More people being more comfortable with the technology as it comes.
Yourself, Toby, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly bold to try and make any prediction for the future right now, other than that, I think, it is inevitable that digital is going to be embedded into our lives to an extent which I think is far more. I think that the shift we've seen, for people of our age, is we've all been through this big transition from early lives when it was landlines and teletext to where we are now. I kind of feel like we've got another change of that magnitude ahead, and it's so hard to see what our lives are going to look like in that state. But I think it's going to be profoundly intertwined with every business process we do. It's going to look very differently. It's going to be very digital. I'm really hoping that the change can be managed well. That particularly, I'm most worried about the effect on employment markets and what it's going to mean to, particularly to eliminate certain skills which have been useful for a very long time. And we find that actually, ChatGPT or its children are simply going to be able to do some of those tasks way better than a person. And can we generate new and meaningful tasks, or ensure that we take those benefits and, we turn that into a 4-day working week. We don't end up with large swathes of the population that are trying to catch up to this digital world, which they've been left behind by. I'm hopeful, because I think there's so much potential for so many things, which it opens up to really improve our lives. I think there's ways in which, my goodness, I wish I had an AI digital coach who could be prompting me to make better choices in my day. That technology is coming. It's, I know there's already low scale like therapist chatbots. I don't believe that's necessarily good. I don't think that should be the future of therapy, but that type of technology, I genuinely think that could make our lives better. But I'm hoping that those things get managed. The positives happen whilst the negatives are controlled.
Just on that point, you mentioned enabling you to make good choices throughout the day. Somebody actually asked me that recently in terms of the work that I do. Could you develop something that enable people to make the right kind of choices throughout the day? So, for example, they were meaning more in terms of a good example would be going to the supermarket. You know, somebody's got a few minutes during work, nip into the supermarket. They haven't had any lunch and they're intending to go and get a couple of items, and they're passing the chocolate stand or something like this. And, you know, and they were saying to me, is it possible to develop something that would actually say, you're now passing the chocolate stand, may I remind you that?
I mean, I think that's absolutely coming. I think that's just, that's an inevitability in my view. And I think that there's this real positives that all the stuff we understand now about human psychology and behavioral patterns, like we've seen a lot of that being used against us by technology so far. I think we've seen a lot of like, you know, big tech trying to make us addicted to stuff that is just not in our interests. It gets them revenue, and that's the end of the line. I think we can move into a world where we're using the best of what we understand about human behavior and then using that to create stuff which will genuinely help us. So I'm excited by that. I can't wait for that technology to be there.
Yeah.
I found it really interesting listening to you guys when you're predicting the future and you kind of going, it's going to be more tech, where generally speaking, and I really am generalizing here, human behavior tends to go from one extreme to another, and then it sort of like swings back a little bit to find some middle ground. So I'm liking what you're saying there, Toby, because it sounds like there might be actually something the tech might support swinging back, and humans and tech might meet in the middle almost.
Oh yeah, and what I want is someone to be like, hey, I've just got a couple of your mates down to go to the pub because our different AIs recognize that human connection would be really valuable to the three of you. That's what I want. Like, not technology that's like, go and sit in your digital meta space. And, you know, that kind of stuff. I think, it needs to be like, no, go and move, go and play, you know, tennis with somebody. Like, that's, you know, that's what I'm hoping for.
Off you go.
Yeah, because those are the barriers that stop us. And I know for myself, and I think a lot of people are like me, is that we know what would make our lives better. Like, we don't need someone to tell us, don't buy that chocolate bar, do that thing. But we just have those really small barriers where I'm just like, oh, I mean, it's the time's gone on now. And if I try and get there now, I'll just do it tomorrow. I'm tired now. And if we could take all those friction points away from making a good choice, I think we'll be better off for it as a society.
I just have my wife's voice echoing in the background where she said to me, she says, I'm not your mother. And I can imagine somebody saying to their AI, oh, flipping heck, it's mum again. But yeah, I can see how that would be a really good thing. And until I was asked that question, I hadn't really thought about, you know, that kind of development. But if it aids living well, then it's got to be a plus. It's just, how can we get the people who, for whatever reason, aren't able to engage with it? Because, well, let's say in terms of purchasing the hardware, you know, to engage with technology, you're talking about a pretty sum. Smartphones, for example, you know, quite pricey. But how can we, in the future, develop things in such a way where everybody can engage with it? So that barrier is taken away, and then it's just then working on people's confidence to be able to engage with it in the best way possible. Those are my thoughts, anyway. So thank you, guys. Really appreciate the time that you're given to just talk about this subject and open it up a bit. I mean, I think you're right in terms of AI. It's a massive area, and it'll be interesting to see how it develops. Even over the next 12 months, I'm sure there'll be some rapid developments will be announced. Yeah, In terms of people wanting to get hold of you, talk with you, connect with you, so for example, other organisations have been listening to what's been said here, and they'd like to sort of chat with you. How would they do that? If we just go around the room, starting with yourself, Toby, how would they get hold of you?
Drop me an email. Always happy to hear from people. So my email address is toby.johnson@triangletechnology.co.uk.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Toby. And Mark?
Same. So drop me an email, mark@iehub.org, or you'll find me on LinkedIn.
Brilliant. And yourself, Lee?
Yeah, email lee.usher@trustfolio.co.uk or LinkedIn. I'm pretty responsive on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah. And for our viewers, there's 3 of us here with very little hair. So it's like the eggheads. I mean that in the nicest possible way, guys. Honestly,
without the brain power.
Yeah, but thank you so much.
The energy's going into the brain power. Got you.
That's right. Thank you, Rachel, for being a wonderful co-host and putting forward the questions, bringing that human element to this, which is vitally important. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of the day.
Cheers,
Thanks, everyone.